Wild Eye magazine will not have gear reviews. It will not have how-to articles. It will not have, here's how you run a slider in Lightroom, or here's how you get shallow versus broad depth of field. No, we don't want to do that. We don't want to do that. I do understand that there is an audience for that, but that's not going to be in the magazine. In the magazine, we want to have landscapes, we have nature, anything nature, wildlife.
Hey everyone, welcome to episode 419 of F-Stop, Collaborate, and Listen. I'm your host, Matt Payne, and this week we're diving into a major shift in the photography industry, the collapse of Outdoor Photographer magazine and what it means for photographers moving forward. My guest today is Jason Bradley, the publisher of Wild Eye magazine, a brand new publication stepping up to fill the void left behind. In this episode, Jason shares his insights into what went wrong with Outdoor Photographer, why he's betting big on a high-quality print magazine in a digital world, and what lessons we can learn from the fall of one of photography's most iconic publications. But Jason isn't just a publisher. He also runs his own high-end print lab, specializing in premium metal prints with a unique approach that you won't find at the big-name labs. We'll talk about what sets his printing process apart and how photographers can better showcase their work in print. If you've ever wondered about the future of photography publications, how to get your work featured in a top-tier magazine, or what goes into crafting museum-quality prints, this episode is for you. Let's dive in. All right, Jason Bradley, it's great to have you on the podcast.
Matt Payne, it's great to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I really, really appreciate it.
Of course, and shout out to mutual acquaintance Jeff Shiwi for making the connection. I'm always grateful for other people in the community who are making those connections for us, and that's what I love about the podcast is it creates community, and it's awesome.
Yeah, and Jeff, if you're listening, thank you. Appreciate you, my friend.
Yeah, absolutely. So Jason, for people who are not familiar with you and who you are, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself?
What can I say? Can you go back to the very beginnings, I suppose? Well, I call myself a nature, wildlife, and underwater photographer. I kind of a jack of all trades sort of guy, though I do everything. I've been a photographer for going on 30 years now, a bit over 25. Prior to being a photographer, kind of how I got into it is I had aspirations in college to become a marine biologist. That's what I wanted to do. I have honestly no idea where that idea even came from. I grew up in the San Fernando Valley. I wasn't a surfer. I was a skateboarder. I have no stories of how my dad took me fishing and on his sailboat or anything like that. I literally had no connection to the ocean at all. But when I was flailing around with trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life and education, I just one day thought, I want to work with dolphins. And I attribute that to maybe a trip or two to Marineland, but I don't even know where it came from. But all I could tell you is after that, I dropped everything that I was doing in my life. I had aspirations to be a musician. In those days, I had long hair. I played guitar. I was playing guitar in college. Cut my hair, got rid of my guitars, mostly. But decided I just wanted to work with marine animals, and I became obsessed with it. And it kind of took me over for years. But after years of doing it in college, and the lifestyle that I created around me, doing that kind of work, which was scuba diving, working on boats, working in the oceans, and I'm from Southern California, as I mentioned, San Fernando Valley, but I went to college in Santa Barbara, going out to the Channel Islands all the time. The lifestyle I created around myself, I fell in love with, but I didn't fall in love with the science side of stuff. So my father had passed away, and I took a bit of a hiatus from school, helped handle his belongings. And before I went back, I thought, I just don't want to do the science stuff anymore. What could I do? Because I didn't want to get rid of the lifestyle. And I thought, I know, I'll do photography. I didn't know what an aperture was. I didn't know what a shutter speed was. I just wanted to use photography as a tool to exploit, to keep me in the oceans and traveling and taking pictures of stuff. So that's how I kind of got into it. Luckily, I fell in love with photography, unlike the sciences. And I mean all aspects of photography, darkroom work, taking pictures not just of animals and marine organisms, but still lives and portraiture and event photography. And I just loved it and devoured it. Anywhere, any place I could. I officially have had about a semester and a half of training. I almost went to the Brooks Institute of Photography in Santa Barbara, but I decided not to after I saw the bill that I would get on the tail end of that. And a dear friend of mine named Sunny Groves, who used to work for Bob Talbot and used to work for me. How I met her is in this marine mammal world I was in. We both worked for the Marine Mammal Rehabilitation Center. We would rehab seals and sea lions and set them free. But anyway, she was a Brooks graduate. And after I told her about the bill that I didn't want to create, she said, check out Santa Monica City College. Santa Monica City College, I found out, had facilities just as good, if not even better than Brooks, with, city college fees. So I was able to save a ton of money. And a semester and a half into it, my instructor at the time, Bob Ware, I'm still kind of in contact with, pulled me aside and said, clearly you're passionate about this. And then said something you wouldn't expect your teacher to do, said, drop out of school.
Wow.
He said that you need to drop out of school and get to work, is what he said. And that's what I did. So I dropped out, got a job as an assistant that didn't last too long. I honestly just started my own businesses. I started a business as a portrait photographer doing headshots and Z cards. My mom was a casting director. So connecting with that world and getting those kind of gigs was easy for me to do. And I just learned on the fly, and that's how I got into it. And then shortly after that, I don't know how I did it, but I landed a job at the aquarium at the Pacific as their photographer, and went off from there.
Wow, that's amazing. And how many years ago was that when you were doing the first piece
Well,
of your career there?
this is, of course, before digital. So this is probably close to 25 years ago that I landed that last job that I mentioned. And it was when I was working at the aquarium that I got my first digital camera. The marketing department did not like how slow film was for, doing all of the promotions that they needed to do. So they bought me a digital camera and forced me to start using it. And it was a Nikon 14N and an Olympus E20. And I was hooked ever since. And I haven't shot a roll of film since. I mean, the quality comparatively back then was terrible, but I got the workflow. I got how quick and productive and easy it made my life as a professional. So I was an early adopter of digital, stopped shooting film, and haven't looked back. However, I do still, from time to time, print analog. I don't think I'll ever shoot a roll of film again unless someone forces me, but still like printing analog. In fact, we might build a darkroom here. We'll get to that later, but
Yeah, I was just going to say,
yeah.
I mean, so you went from marine photographer and now you are a magazine publisher, you run your own print lab and have a gallery. So like what happened between that and where you're at today?
Well, I skipped taking my medication and my ADHD took off, and I do now today all kinds of things. Yes, I am. Well, first of all, I now live no longer in Southern California or Central California. Excuse me, I live in Central California in Monterey Peninsula, home of Ansel Adams and Edward Weston, Imogen Cunningham, the Friends of Photography thing, here in Monterey. And I've been here for about 20 years. Yeah, I have in the heart of downtown Pacific Grove, which is not as well heard of as, say, Monterey or Carmel, but it's the town that's in between those two. Pacific Grove is on the west end of the Monterey Peninsula and is right in between Pebble Beach and Monterey. In heart of downtown Pacific Grove, I have a 2,300 square foot gallery and print lab. And I've been doing fine art printing for other photographers for about 9 years now. It's a business that's all been built by word of mouth. This podcast might be officially my first time marketing this thing, but I'm really proud of what I built here, and we have a small group here. We're not like Bay Photo. We have hundreds of people. I have 3 people on staff, so we're small but quite effective for what we do. With what we do.
Yeah. And then the gallery space, is that just for your work or is it for all sorts of photographers?
It is both currently. So right now, for example, I have 2 exhibits going. I have on one wall work that is mine that I've done in Kenya over the last several years. Don't do just underwater photography. In fact, I'm leading a group and 3 weeks to Kenya again. And on the other wall, we have a group exhibition that's 23 different artists that have either printed through us or done one of our workshops at one point or the other. And so two different shows currently, and we're about to change them over in a few months. And then none of my work are going to be on the wall. I'm going to dedicate one wall to the guy that runs my print lab, Joe Placco, and then a photographer that hopefully you all have heard of, and somebody I'd recommend for you to interview at one point, a guy named Bob Talbot. Have you ever heard of Bob?
I have not. Mm-mm.
You should. Bob is a legend in the world of underwater photography, and especially in the world of underwater cinematography. He was the cinematographer for all the Free Willy movies.
Okay.
Kind of a pioneer in the world of cetacean and orca conservation. And everybody, when I described the poster that went viral in the 90s, before viral was a word, everybody then knows this word. But back in the 90s, mid to early 90s, there was a poster of just a whale fluke with a beautiful backdrop titled Megaptera. And everybody had that poster. You remember that? Remember seeing that?
I think so, yes.
Yeah, anyway, look up if you haven't, Bob Talbot. But Bob Talbot's going to do a show here. He lives in Monterey as well. So Bob's going to do a show here in Joe Placco in a few months.
Love that. All right. Well, I want to get into kind of the heart of our conversation and dive into kind of magazine publishing. So I think there's a lot of demand out there for photography magazines since the collapse of Outdoor Photography Magazine, which I think you're very familiar with. I think the collapse of OPM sent a lot of ripples throughout the industry, and overnight, like a lot of the main advertising avenues that a lot of people were depending on for workshops and other things just kind of disappeared overnight. So what happened?
That's a good question. So I'm a publisher now. Speaking of things that came out of nowhere, the idea of me becoming a publisher, like I want to work with marine animals, came out of nowhere. If you asked me a year ago, do I want to be a publisher and run a magazine, I would laugh at the idea. However, I was a writer for Outdoor Photographer for close to 15 years. I did blog posts for them. I did columns for them. I did webinars for them. Back in the day, for those of you who have an intimate sort of relationship with OP, and the followers of OP did, what I found out, not to go off track here, but as I found out later, OP was around for over 30 years, well over 3 decades, and over 60% of its subscribership had been subscribed to the magazine for over 20 years. They had a very loyal following. So
Right, yeah.
Anyway, so I was started working with him back 15 years ago, and a guy named Chris Robinson was still the editor just after Rob Shepard, and then Werner Publishing had some financial issues. And so there was a period of time where the contributors weren't getting paid, and everybody thought OP was going to be done. But a company called Matavor came and bought everything out. Anyway, fast forward until about a year ago, OP had changed hands again from Matavor to a company called the Bebop Channel. And long story short, and you're welcome to ask more questions if you like, but long story short is that things were mismanaged from my perspective, and mismanaged in the sense that OP, it's not like I said, they had a loyal following, and it's not like they weren't doing well. OP was making money. So it did not go away because, from what I saw, it was not making money. It went away because it wasn't valued and it was mismanaged. As the Bebop Channel took it over, I'm sure everybody's thinking, the Bebop Channel? Like Jazz Bebop? Yeah, like Jazz Bebop. A guy named Greg Royal owned the Bebop Channel, and he's a jazz musician. So he was not interested so much in Outdoor Photographer as much as he was one of the sister publications named Jazz Times. And along with Jazz Times was a bunch of other brands that just happened to be available. OP, magazines on bird watching, aviation, diabetes, etc. But because Greg's main interest was in Jazz Times, OP ended up being mismanaged, and it just didn't go well. So it went under. as this was happening, I did try and jump in and acquire it and save it. And I found after some time in negotiations that it was better to just take the resources that were at hand because the amount of debt it had and how much damage it had, the brand had had, to start something completely new. And that's what I decided to do along with some friends and colleagues, and really the staff for outdoor photographer as well. So the staff for outdoor photographer that, for whatever reason, got laid off in the middle of our negotiations decided to come work for me. So that's what's happening is outdoor photographer staff, Dan Havlick, Scott Bransgard, Bob Neth, and as of last week, even Kristen Ashworth, who was their managing editor for over 10 years, is working with me now on, to create Wild Eye.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. Well, let's talk about Wild Eye, because from the ashes rises the phoenix of Wild Eye, and you just launched it as a publisher. You probably, like you said, you didn't really envision yourself publishing a magazine. So what is Wild Eye, and who's it for?
Let's talk about what it is and what it is not. What it is, since I'm talking about it from the context of, as you put it, out of the ashes of, it's not outdoor photographer, even though the staff is working, for us now and et cetera. It is not outdoor.
Can I just say parenthetically, thank God.
Can I ask why you say that?
I was a subscriber for maybe 2 years at the very start of my photography career back in early 2010s, that area. And I just felt like it was all just kind of recycled content with a lot of just designed to sell advertising. And there wasn't a lot of stuff that kind of kept you hooked in as someone who was kind of beyond the, how do I use a camera, aperture, shutter speed phase of learning. And I know there's some contributors that did some work to, like William Neal, a good friend of mine, and my friend Sarah Marino, they contributed articles and things like that. But I just felt like for the most part, it wasn't really, the life cycle of the magazine wasn't really designed for someone who was in it long term, if that makes sense.
It does. It does. And I wholeheartedly agree with you, which is why I say I want to talk a little bit what we're not. And
yeah, good.
Because you're not alone with that sentiment. I've heard from lots of colleagues the same thing. I was even having a conversation with Kristen Ashworth, who I mentioned, who was the managing editor that is now working with us as well, that toward the end of the magazine, she was hearing a handful of complaints of the content that still did exist was dwindling, and all that remained was advertising and gear reviews, and it was disheartening. It was disheartening for a lot of that loyal following that I said existed for a couple of decades or more.
Right.
So, and I'm one of those. I remember as I was just getting into photography, looking at Outdoor Photographer and a cool magazine this is, and seeing seeing Bill Neal's stuff in there and John Sexton stuff and articles on Ansel, and it was inspiring. It was absolutely inspiring. So when I started actually working with OP, I was over the moon. But anyway, I digress. What we're not is an extension of that kind of content. And Outdoor Photographer, toward the end, they did some adventure travel. A lot of, as you put it, how-to articles. That was geared toward a lot of beginners. And landscape and wildlife, barely ever anything in the world of underwater photography or ocean stuff. And so we don't want to do that. The magazine, Wild Eye magazine, will not have gear reviews. It will not have how-to articles. It will not have, here's how you run a slider in Lightroom, or here's how you get shallow versus broad depth of field. No, we don't want to do that. We don't want to do that. I do understand that there is an audience for that, but that's not going to be in the magazine. In the magazine, we want to have landscapes, we have anything nature, wildlife. Absolutely, we're going to have the world's best underwater photographers with a strong emphasis on conservation photography, and really approach our content with well-curated portfolios that talk about how to conceptualize essays and portfolios and well-thought-out work, more of a higher-level narrative than what OP was producing toward the end of their run. That's our goal. That's our goal.
Yeah, and I suppose there's a little bit of a risk reward in that approach because you're niching down. Like with the broader approach of a lot of beginners, you have a much, it's a bigger pool of people that might have an interest in that. But at the same time, like, it's hard to keep those people engaged in a magazine if like they've moved beyond that. So, like you said, I see the value in that kind of broader beginner landscape photography approach. But I think you're missing like a really dedicated niche audience that it sounds like you're trying to tap into with the Wild Eye.
Yeah, and I would like for people that are not even necessarily photographers to get into wild eye. If you just love looking at beautiful work or beautiful things of nature and underwater, and this is the magazine for you to look at. You watch Wild Kingdom, this is the magazine for you to look at. I don't want to compare myself to any one thing, but if you can take the natural history section of National Geographic out and set it
Right.
aside, that's kind of where we're going. But I also like the beauty of Lensworks and how that magazine curates its portfolios and presents its stuff and how it's laid out. Frames magazines and other issues. So between those three, if we can like put something together that takes pieces from all of that, that's what I want Wild Eye to be. But something unique out of all of those ideas, and even cultural themes, weave those in from time to time as well. People are an integral part of the natural world and environment, and should therefore not be separated from the kinds of things that are in our magazine.
Yeah, I love that. That makes perfect sense. Well, it seems like, now that we're in this wild digital age and people have kind of moved away from print media a little bit, it seems like doubling down on a print medium for photography seems a little bit risky. Why do you think that your gamble will pay off?
Well, it's a good question, and as I got into this silly idea, like I said a year ago, I didn't have any interest in or idea in doing this and know nothing about publishing. So why the hell take the leap and take the jump? There's a few reasons why, and it's kind of a few things that kind of came together. First thing is the people around me. If this was me by myself, there's no way in hell I would do it.
Hmm.
But it's the people around me that kind of got me going. And what I mean by that is the staff for outdoor photographer that came over, other colleagues, Amy Gulick, Melissa Grew, the columnists that were columnists for outdoor photographers. So it's not just the staff. We have Amy Gulick, who was a columnist for there, and Melissa Grew, that are now moved their columns over to Wild Eye magazine, and a handful of others that were contributors, outdoor photographer, that were like, please, please, please continue this. We don't have, without OP going, there is nothing else domestically. There's stuff outside of the country, but domestically speaking, there's really not much else, not much out there. There are some digital magazines, they restrict themselves to a particular kind of content, like strictly landscapes or strictly wildlife or strictly this thing or that thing. But we want to have a broad scope that supports this community that's seemingly like no other magazine does, and I have an upwelling of support from a lot of colleagues. So that was motivating, and I was just personally devastated with OP leaving, that I wanted to continue the legacy as well. And then there's some other publications that are kind of in the genre, but not in the genre, that, believe it or not, are thriving. And in fact, I could point you to, and I don't remember the title of this article off the top of my head, but as I was making this decision of should I do this or not, a few weeks into the grueling decision, I stumbled across an article in the New York Times that profiled a handful of magazines like Adventure Journal and Mountain Gazette and a few others that, when I say we're kind of in the genre, what I mean there is the outdoor and outdoor adventure genre, that are thriving right now. And they're thriving and doing print publications, and they're thriving and doing print publications, and not using the old standard model of selling advertising, but instead getting rid of advertising altogether and selling the magazine for premium subscription rates, and doing quite well. So all of that, and then, I forgot to mention, probably even the most important thing is, like I said at the beginning of this, OP was making money. They weren't doing poorly. I didn't look at the numbers, 10 years ago versus today. I'm sure there's a dip there, but OP had a following and it was making money. So all of the signs were kind of there that there's a hunger for it. There's a potential to make money with it. And it just inspired me to get going with this. And I'm feeling optimistic. And I say that with a turn of the head like that because even though I've never done anything like this before, I'm feeling like we're doing the right thing. The response has been good and we're going the right direction.
Yeah, that sounds great. And I would agree. I mean, I think there's riches and niches, right? I mean, I
Riches and
think,
niches. I like that. Yeah.
yeah,
I
and
could have just said that and saved you 5 minutes.
well, there's a nuance in there too, but I think you're right though. I think because of everything being so digital and everything's in social media and let's face it, like there's nothing better than having a tactile print, like even if it's in a magazine, like to be able to hold it in your hands and to take it with you onto an airplane or whatever. Like I think there's something to be said for that experience of reading and experience and consuming art and photography. And so I think you're tapping into something that people have been wanting for a while now in terms of photography. I'd be curious to hear you talk a little bit though about what lessons you think you can glean from the downfall of Outdoor Photography magazine and how your publication is going to be different from that, other than what we've already talked about.
It's a good question. I think, based on what I said, I don't think what happened to Outdoor Photographer, the only thing that really happened to Outdoor Photographer magazine is it ended up being managed by those that didn't have a passion for the genre.
That's a pretty strong recipe for a lack of success.
Yeah. And that's not me. I'm obsessed with photography and the genre. And as long as I can not drive myself crazy, that's a recipe for success. I love this community. I love this genre. I love the art form. I love the craft. I love everything about it. And I'm so inspired by how many photographers there are right there right now that are just really good. That I will. This is an excuse for me to now immerse myself into the community in a way that I've never been able to do before. And up until recently, I've felt, you'd hear me complain often how isolating photography can be. Running your own business, doing everything yourself. All of your colleagues are competitors more than they are friends. Photography can be very isolating, but not from this perspective. From this perspective, I'm actually kind of feel like I'm creating a community and I'm celebrating other people's work and art, and I'm loving this. I'm loving it. The more I'm doing it, honestly, the more happy I am that I made the decision to do this.
Yeah, that resonates a lot for me. I think we had spoken about this before, but about 5 years ago now, I partnered with 3 other photographers and we created an international landscape photography competition that has very specific rules. It's called the Natural Landscape Photography Awards. And we produce this super awesome, high quality coffee table book every year. And it's been a really great experience to see the community rally around the project and like get excited about seeing their photographs in the book and getting excited about kind of the things that we're sharing on social media and things like that. So getting the community involved in the way that you view photography, I think is a really powerful way to not only keep you engaged, but also to show you a much more personal and interesting side of photography that maybe has been lacking before, right?
Yeah, the C word is key here, and that's community. And yeah, what you said there about what you found through the contest that you built is exactly what I'm feeling and experiencing with this as well. A sense of community that I wasn't able to experience prior to it. And there are, when I first started doing this kind of stuff 30 years ago, as I mentioned, outdoor photography, especially underwater photography, was a pretty exclusive club of people. But with the advent of digital and technology, it's really democratized the craft, and everybody's a photographer now, right? But along with that, along with that is so many good photographers out there, and to use tools like you're using and like I'm using to bring them all together and create a sense of community is it's a lot of fun, a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about that community aspect and how it relates to the magazine. So I'm gonna guess that people listening are gonna wonder. First thing they're gonna wonder is like, Man, how can I get my work featured in a magazine like Wild Eye? So, what advice would you have for aspiring photographers looking to have their work published in a top notch publication such as yours?
Well, thank you for using the phrase top notch. You've looked through issue one then, yes?
Yeah, it's good stuff.
Yeah, cool. So, first thing I would suggest to do is get familiar with the publication itself. Get familiar with what we're doing with the magazine itself. And I don't think we've mentioned this yet, but the magazine is currently digital only. And our goal is to build our audience in this first year here. And then from there, as we get into the black, go into print. Like I said, I have a print lab here. I believe deeply in the value of having something in our hands that we can hold and look at and cherish. It hits a different part of our brain than something we see on a computer screen. So that is our main goal, first of all. We want to be a print publication after year one. But there's also, and I didn't mention this before either, there's also an online component as well. There's the magazine itself, and then there's what we're, for lack of a better title yet, and maybe this is the title we'll work with, WE Online. And we're building an archive of content online as well. Before, when I was describing what the magazine was, I was really describing what we're not and how we're different than LP and the kind of stuff that we want to publish. But that doesn't mean that I also don't see value in nurturing that audience that wants to know where to push that Lightroom slider or the difference between shallow and broad depth of field, and have instructional content and some gear review content or that stuff. So that's what WE Online is going to be about. We do want to have educational content there. So there's two areas for contributors to work with, to answer your question here, Matt, and get familiar with what issue one looks like. And as of later this month, issue two, and by the time people are listening to this podcast, issue two will be out, and Art Wolf is going to be our main feature in issue two, but we'll also have Austin Mann is going to be one of our ongoing contributors, being there. Melissa Grew, John McCormick will be in the publication along with others. So that'll be out. So get familiar with issue one, get familiar with issue two, start reading the kinds of things that we have online, and that'll give any potential contributor some idea as to how and what they can pitch to us to be a part of our magazine and our Back to the Seatward community.
Before we dive back in, I want to take a quick moment to tell you about something that might actually make your life a little easier. If you're like me, you put everything into capturing the perfect photograph. But when it comes time to name it, write a description, or even price it, it can feel overwhelming. That's where Art Helper comes in. This AI-powered tool is designed for artists and photographers to take the guesswork out of presenting and marketing your work. It helps generate compelling titles, rich descriptions, and even custom artist statements, so your images connect with buyers and collectors effortlessly. But it doesn't stop there. Do you need help writing blog posts, social media captions, or emails to your audience? Art Helper has you covered. Struggling to find the right Facebook groups or subreddits to share your work? It can help with that too. You can even get AI-powered pricing suggestions for your prints. Now, I'll be honest, I tend to be skeptical of AI tools for creative work, but I gave Art Helper a try, and I have to say, it's actually pretty robust and functional. If you've ever felt stuck when it comes to the business side of photography, this might be worth checking out. Don't take my word for it, give it a shot. Find a link to this awesome tool in the show notes. All right, let's get back to this week's episode. How would you describe the process of filtering out submissions? Because I'm guessing, or maybe you haven't experienced this quite yet, but as the magazine grows, I would envision that people are going to be contacting you constantly, right? So how are you going to weed out the good stuff from the stuff that you're not interested in, for lack of a better way of putting it?
There's two things that we're going to look at there: quality of the content in terms of the portfolios themselves, and the narrative that goes along with them. Meaning that a good working photographer today has to know how to write, or should know how to write. it's going to give you a much better opportunity to get your work published. And now I know I've already had conversations with some of these photographers where I've looked at their work and I'm like, this stuff is great. We'd like to feature you. Do you write? No, I don't. Okay, take care. Writing is, I remember one of the first books I got, well over 2 decades ago, was a book by John Shaw. Credit to John Shaw there. I don't even remember the title of it. It was something about how to be a professional photographer. But the thing John Shaw used to beat into us readers' heads, those of us that were reading his books and articles, was you need to write. And that was back then. If you don't write anything, if you don't know how to write, you're not going to get anywhere. You might be able to sell some prints and do that, but you've got to know how to write. And that's still true today, I think. Especially if you're going to submit to a magazine, you got to know how to write. And you need to know how to speak well about what you're passionate about and what your work is about and what it means to you and how it could or couldn't make a difference in the community that you're trying to speak to with your work. Those things are crucially important. So first and foremost, to answer your question more succinctly, the quality of the work needs to be there, and you got to back it up with a good ability to write as well.
Yeah, that resonates a lot for me, and I feel lucky in that I enjoy writing. I would say it's not like my best trait, but I'm decent at it. And I think it's one of those things that the more you do it, the better you get at it. And
Absolutely.
just like photography, if you can get other people to look at it and give you feedback on it, you're going to get better and better over time. So if it's not something you're super into right now, there's ways to get better at it.
Well, and let me say, for those that are listening that might be a little intimidated by the concept of learning to write, oh my God, there's a whole other thing I got to learn now. I would suggest just jump into it and do it and use ChatGPT to help start you. Don't let it write for you, but let it help kind of galvanize your thoughts and ideas and concepts and create an outline for you and create something that's a foundation for what you want to say. Lots of writers do that nowadays, and I do it. But then take it and tweak it and put it in your own words. And you just got to start somewhere. But when I started writing for magazines, I had no ability to write. I didn't practice. I didn't have much background in it, but I just started doing it. And to your point, Matt, the more I did it, the better I got at it, the clearer my concepts became, the faster I was at it. And after I had another silly idea I had many years ago, I decided to write a book on Lightroom that was published by Focal Press. They asked for a 90,000 word book. I gave them 190,000 words at the end of it. I got edited down quite a bit. But after writing that book, after I sat down and wrote that thing, I was officially good at writing and feel very confident with my capabilities now. But the sooner you get into it, the sooner you practice it, the better off you're going to be. And it also makes you I think it makes you a better photographer. It absolutely makes me a better photography instructor. If I was not a writer, I would not be a good photography instructor for sure. But anyway, get into writing.
That makes a ton of sense because you have to distill down ideas into a way that people can understand them, and writing is a natural way to get better at that. So that makes complete sense to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So as you were talking, it occurred to me that we have a lot in common in that we have like 1,000 different projects that we've got our fingers into in terms of like you're running a gallery and a print lab, and you've become a magazine publisher, and you're an workshop instructor, and you write articles and you write books. So like, how do you keep it all the plates spinning? Like, how do you keep your attention focused on the right thing? What is your process for staying organized and successful?
I do corporate consulting as well. It's the lesson that I learned, I want to say about 7 or 8 years ago or so. It was kind of late in my career, unfortunately. Most of my career has been me keeping my head down, being isolated, learning the craft, traveling, doing the stuff that we outdoor photographers want to do. But the lesson that I learned 7 or 8 years ago is if I ever wanted to grow or expand what I did or build this or build that, I have to stop isolating and start building teams and networks of people around me. And once I got that concept and started doing that, I was able to do 10 times more than I was able to do as an individual. So yeah, it sounds like a lot. Yeah, I got a print lab and I have a gallery and I publish a magazine and da 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 da. But I'm not sitting here doing this all by myself. I'm doing it with a team of people that are talented, that are committed, and I'm grateful to all of them. I mentioned Joe Blacko. He runs the print lab here. And then for the magazine, all those names I mentioned before, Dan Havlick, Miriam Bettelstein, Kristen Ashworth, Scott Bransgard, Bob Meth, not to mention the contributors. It's the team around me that has made all this possible. So I'm just one little spoke in the big wheel. There's lots of other people, names, and stuff that deserve all the credit for making this stuff work and possible.
So if someone's sitting, listening, and they're like, I just do everything myself, and that all sounds amazing. How do you scale to the point where that becomes feasible?
Commitment and time. Probably the same for you with the business that you started there with the workshop business and with the other colleagues and then the contest. And you just start somewhere and you start with one other person and you just start building piece by piece, brick by brick, month by month, year by year, and things just grow over time. And the more you get that idea while doing it with teams and networks, you're just going to naturally grow.
Yeah. And I feel like that's also a recipe for preventing burnout as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It creates its own challenges, but you're absolutely right. It creates burnout. And don't get me wrong. I'm stressed. I'm juggling a lot right now. But the thing is that I'm able to do this and it's exciting and I love the sense of community and I can go on and on and on about the good, positive, fun things about all this. But it is stressful. There is a lot more to be concerned and worried about as a result of this. And there are new challenges with it as well. Like with having a team of people, I have to learn how to manage a team of people and, become a manager and become my own HR department, become all the things that come with having to deal with teams of people and employees, etc. But you figure it out. Like we all have to figure out photography. Like I had to figure out writing. It's trial by fire, and you just figure it out.
And it's like every week, life presents you with something where it's like, oh, I get to learn how international cargo shipping works this week. That's cool. Never thought I'd have to learn that one.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, but it's funny you should say it like that because every week is a new challenge and a new problem and a new fire to put out and a new thing. And the idea is just not let it get to you and know that day to day what my job really is to manage problems. But with the greater goal in mind, it's easy to do.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Before I jump in, I wanted to see if we can give you guys a special offer.
Oh, of course. Yeah, let's do it.
Magazine.
Yeah, let's do that.
When this airs, for those listening to this podcast, we usually the magazine right now we're selling it for $49 per year. During the airing of this, as issue 1 just comes out for free. We're doing an inaugural offer of $29 instead of $49, but that's going to go away at the end of December here. And today's the last day. That's when we're doing this. But anyway, we want to offer your audience a special offer not available to the public of $19 to subscribe to Wild Eye Magazine. If anybody listening wants to check it out first, you can go to wildeyemagazine.com and download issue 1 for free. That's going to be like that throughout the year. We want everybody to take a look, and you're welcome to taste before you buy or test drive before you buy sort of thing. So feel free to do that at any time. But if you want to just jump in, we'll give you a coupon code, FSTOP, name of your podcast here. And with that coupon code, be able to redeem it for $19 for the year instead of $49.
Beautiful. And we'll put all the information for that into the show notes as well in case people are driving or whatever.
Yeah, good. Thanks for that, Matt.
Yeah, of course, man. So let's talk about print labs.
Okay.
You've had your print lab, I think you said 8 years now.
I have to look at the calendar, but 8, 9, maybe even 10, but it's been many years now. And I started it, sorry to interrupt your question, but started was just a little printer in the back of my apartment at the time, my little home studio, and it grew into what we're about to talk about.
Yeah, it was actually my first question was going to be, why the heck did you decide to create a print
Why did I
lab?
have that here? A lot of harebrained ideas. Why did I do that one? Well, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, I wrote a book on Lightroom published by Focal Press, and I've been teaching, I was an early adopter of digital, as I mentioned. So with that came an ability to teach digital photography and digital workflow from early in my career. Before Lightroom came out in 2007, I was teaching digital techniques and workflow, talking about, teaching people how to edit in Photoshop and ACR when it first came out, and Photo Mechanic, and how to use Bridge and other kinds of programs to manage noise. You can download Grain Surgery. If anybody remembers that, I've been teaching workflow for a long time. And at one point, I was sponsored by a lab out in Emeryville in the Bay Area named Pictopia, and Pictopia didn't last, as a lot of print labs haven't. Didn't do, it's funny, with all of the photographers that we're talking about around nowadays, photographers don't print as much as they
Yeah.
used to. They just don't print as much as they used to, because we get all of the social interaction virtually nowadays. So why do the printing that we used to? But anyway, that lab is along with a bunch of others went under. At the time, I had a Epson 3880 that I was doing my 17-inch wide and smaller prints on at home in my little home studio. And then they did everything else for me that I would send off to customers and clients and such. And they were printing on what was called a light jet at the time. I think a few labs still use light jets, and allows us to do digital files and print onto silver paper. So they would run silver paper through the light jet machine. But what I was finding, even back in those days with my janky old Epson 3880, is the quality and consistency that I was getting out of my digital printing back then was seemingly superior than what I was getting out of the light jet. So when they went under, I thought I can go to this lab or this lab and try and get another deal and sponsorship and et cetera. I thought, I'm just going to take my resources and I'm going to invest in some bigger printers and offer this as an extension to my workflow clients because, part of workflow is printing, right?
Yeah.
So I'll just offer as a little bit of a service. So at the end of all of my teachings of here's how you organize and here's how you develop, now here's how you print. And it just kind of grew from there by way of word of mouth. And I'm of the opinion back then, as I am now, that printing is probably the most valuable step of a photographer's workflow. You have to print. If you are not printing, it's going to be challenging, if not impossible, to evolve in your craft, because there's a feedback we get from seeing a print, holding a print, experiencing print, and all the things that come along with the process of what we go through to get to a print that gives us a kind of feedback that we don't get otherwise. So printing is an incredibly valuable part of our workflow. And I've been trying to teach that and preach that and evangelize that idea. And the lab is the manifestation of that evangelical side of me.
Yeah, and I love what you said there because it's so true. And not only from just a technical perspective, like when you print something, I can almost guarantee 95% of the time you're going to find something that you just didn't see on the screen that bothers you or that you feel like needs to be changed or tweaked to make the photograph look better. So it's good from that kind of closing the loop perspective. But it's also, for me, it's just like that's the final product of creating the art, right? It's like you get to experience it in a completely different way. You get to move around it, especially if you print something large. You can move around it, see how it reacts to light differently. I mean, there's so many cool things about printing your work that I just feel like it just enhances the overall experience of being a photographer. And I'm with you. Like I tell people all the time, you need to print your work, print your work, print your work. So
Do you print your own stuff, or do you use a lab? Or
I do a little bit of both. I have a tiny little printer that I do up to 12 by 18s on. And then I work with labs to do the other stuff. But yeah, I like to print a lot. Yeah, it's fun.
good, yeah. Well, there was that old famous quote from Ansel Adams, between the score and the performance. I mean, photographers, our end product is the print, and the sculptures is the sculpture, and the musicians is is the performance. And, it goes on and on. We photographers, in our craft and our art form, it's to print, even though so many photographers nowadays do not. One of the questions that I pose is there's, a modern 20-something photographer with a substantial following on Instagram or whatever social media platform, say tens of thousands, figured out how to, beat the algorithms. But if that 20-something photographer has never made a print before, is he or she actually a photographer? I mean, nowadays the answer is yes to some degree, but per the points that you were just making and that I'm trying to evangelize, is that if you want to get better at your craft, you just going to have to figure out some way to make that final product for all kinds of reasons. The ones that you just stated, another great one is that photographer, that 20-something photographer that I just mentioned, I guarantee you that if they decided to start making a print, they're going to look through their body of work with a much more discerning eye than they were going to look at their body of work if they're just going to throw something up on Instagram or TikTok. And why a more discerning eye? Because they're going to make a print out of it that's going to be big. It's going to be shown on a wall. And the details, when you look at a print like that, matter more. The color matters more. The details matter more. Everything matters more when you make a print out of it. So that just that idea of going through your body work with a more discerning eye, just that alone makes you better. Just that alone has you analyzing your technique in a way that your non-printing photographer does or doesn't do. So it makes you sharper looking at your body of work. But there's all kinds of reasons why it makes you better.
No pun intended.
And good catch there, Matt.
It is interesting because I remember when I first started seriously trying to print my stuff, I remember like being very disappointed, right? Like it's like, whoa, this is not what I thought this would look like. And so it's a very humbling experience, but I think that's an important step to go through as a photographer at some point in your career, because as you just said, it is going to make you a better photographer. It's not going to make you better at Instagram. It's not going to make you more popular with the algorithms. But I think if your goal is to maximize your artistic potential and your enjoyment of the craft of photography as a hobby or something you're seriously interested in, I think printing is the step that you need to take it to. Absolutely.
Yeah, and it's personally more rewarding, to extend what you were just saying there, in that when you print your own work and you finally get to a place where I'm proud of this, because it's not easy to print well. It's an art form all unto itself. And you're nodding your head, yes, you get this. It's an art form all unto itself, right? And when you finally get a print in your hand that like, this looks good, the feeling you get from that, I promise that 20-something photographer that I was just referring to there, that might not have ever done a print before, but has tens of thousands of followings. If you're that guy, if you end up making if you end up making a print that you're proud of, the feeling you're going to get from that is going to be so much better than getting 20,000 likes on Instagram. It just is. It just is. I guarantee it.
I agree.
No.
100%. Yeah, there's no question.
Especially if you could take it to another level of having it hung on a wall in a public place. Who cares if it's at a coffee shop or wherever it is? Then it's hung on where people are seeing it and going, ooh, ooh, ah, ah. Nothing feels better.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. Well, let's talk about some of the nitty gritty of your lab. So you mentioned it's small. It's like you and a couple other people running the show. Other than the fact that it's small and more niche and all of that, how is it different than other labs? Like, what are some of the things that you're doing differently? I think you had mentioned to me you have like a very unique metal product that you've developed. I'd love to hear about that.
Well, I'd like to think everything's unique about it in the sense that the fact that we're small is unique. The fact that we're all photographers and passionate about the craft is unique. Our subtitle to our lab here is we're a lab by photographers for photographers. So people send us stuff and we can look at it right away and have banter with our clients of this is working and this is not working, and then develop stuff like I said a little while ago. I've been teaching digital workflow for quite a long time now. So between Joe and myself, we can have banter with our clients and help with guiding through developmental processes, ICC, color management, and consistency processes, teach as we go in ways that other labs just can't do. So we're not just lab techs hitting the print button and what the file you send us is what you get and good luck.
Yeah,
we
been
like
there,
we
done
like
that.
yeah, right. And that honestly turned a lot of photographers experience that working with other labs, and it's disheartening and it can turn you off and it can be frustrating. It can be costly. So we can have a different kind of banter with our clients that other labs don't get to do. And that's even said in the kind of files that we accept, unlike other labs. Other labs, especially the big ones, it's JPEGs only, 8-bit only.
Right. Crazy.
And then even the pro ones are, you'll get the 16-bit, TIFF submissions, but we want your raw file. If you're doing raw file workflow, that's what we want you to send us. If you're doing stuff in Photoshop or Nick or other kind of program where you're processing stuff, no problem at all. Make sure it's 16-bit. Make sure it's a TIFF or a PSD or some kind of press version. Go for it. But we photographers that get it. Staying in the raw environment as long as we can is what we should do. And that's what we want you to send us, because then if there's any kind of need for tweaking a highlight to bring in a detail or doing that to a shadow or having that banter that I was referring to you about, we can do that on the fly. And printing directly from the raw is just going to give us more capabilities in all kinds of ways. And then if you're worried about, well, what about my noise? What about sizing it properly? What about sharpening it properly? That's easy. We'll do that for you on the tail end. We know all about DxO, Pure Raw, and the denoising algorithms in Adobe and Topaz, and we know about all that stuff. And if we need to use it, great. And if we don't need to use it, we don't. But we analyze that stuff as we go, and we'll handle that for you. A good lab will handle all of that for you. That's the point of actually using a good lab. And that's not always been the case, even before digital, and it's still the case today. If you're a good lab, understands how to play with contrast and play with color and play with texture and play with details and make your image look good. Yeah. So that's the one distinct difference. But to go back to your question about materials that we use, we do canvas printing, we do paper printing, of course, and then we do metals. But the metal we do is very different, and so different that I really should call it something else other than metal print, because when you think of a metal print nowadays, it's ubiquitous. It's a dye sublimation print made with an Epson printer or another kind of printer, and those are 4-ink printers or 6-ink printers. And dye sublimation has its issues from my perspective, my humble perspective. And the issues have to do with, and if you don't know what I mean by the way of dye sublimation, that's how the vast majority of metal prints nowadays are made. You think of it like an iron-on t-shirt. You print using a dye ink. And dye inks are typically not used for fine art. They're typically used for textiles and fabrics and commercial applications. But think of it like an iron-on t-shirt. You use a dye ink, you print onto a transfer medium, which you then place on top of a metal sheet, and you literally use a heat press to do a gas exchange from that transfer medium onto the final substrate. And when you do that, arguably you get a bit of a quality hit in the detail. Because as I mentioned, those dye sub printers are 4 or 6 ink sets. They don't have as broad of a gamut as should I lift my, there's a bit of a hint of a printer there. My Epson, SureColor P10 and 20,000 printers that will print using 10 inks at a time. So a much, much wider gamut. And of course, these printers I'm talking about behind me here are not dye inks. They are aqueous ink or pigment inks, and are inherently more archival. So to nutshell it for you, the metal prints we do here are aqueous metal prints, aqueous ink metal prints, not dye sub, and arguably have better color, detail, and archivability.
Not to give away your secrets here, but I'm pretty well versed in the dye sublimation process, but I'd be curious if you could talk a little bit about like the technical side of how you're printing onto the metal surface. Like, is it a transfer process? Is it a direct to metal? Like, what does that look like?
It's the substrate we use is, like I said at the beginning, I'm an open. Oh no, before we started this, I'm an open book. So no proprietary trade secrets here or anything. We are mounting to die bond, and the difference is that with the typical metal print you get nowadays, it's just a thin aluminum sheet, right? And
Right.
there's sometimes a white coating on it, or not a white coating if you want that brushed aluminum look with your print. But either way, there's a coating on that metal sheet. So dye sub is a bit of a variation in that it is a substrate that has two really thin metal slices that sandwiches a polyethylene core. But it's something that's been used that's used uh, quite often by labs as a rigid mounting substrate. Another example of that would be, what's the name of that stuff? That plasticky stuff, Sintra.
Oh yeah.
So because if you're doing big giant prints, mounting on foam core, no.
Bad
Mounting
idea.
on even Gator, no. So having alternatives like Dibond or Sintra, which will be rigid with something big like that, that if they're introduced to humid environments or environments that have shifts in temperature, won't bow or warp or shift on you like that. So first thing we do is and that's why we're calling a metal, we use Dibond, and then we print onto its self-adhesive paper-like stuff. It's the best thing I can do to call it. And then we mount that onto the Dibond, and then we laminate the surface of that either with a matte or a glossy finish. So one of the things that's nice about the metals that we do, in addition to what I've been talking about, is when most people think of metal nowadays, they think of the super shiny, glossy, highly reflective end product. And a lot of people like that. In fact, the print behind you of the mountains, that looks like a glossy print there. Am I right?
That one is a glossy metal. Yes.
Okay, good. So glossy is stunning if lit well, lit properly. But there's also, for a lot of photographers, the concern of being distracted by the reflectivity. So we offer a matte version as well. And the matte doesn't have that issue at all, but it has all of the benefits of the broad gamut, the good contrast, the good detail, but without the reflectivity. So we offer glossy and matte.
Beautiful. Yeah, no, I currently with my metals, I'm printing on a matte metal surface, so it's doesn't have the reflectivity, but it still suffers from what you're describing in terms of like the loss of gamut and the loss of a little bit of the detail. I mean, I think metals DPI is only like maybe 200 max. I mean, it's not crazy detailed like you're gonna get from a really good acrylic print or a fine art print. So it sounds like it's a
Again,
nice kind of in between like product that kind of checks all the boxes.
I'm really proud of it. I hope that the people listening to this will at least let me send them a sample of it, because we haven't marketed this yet. Once we start doing, I think the community is gonna really love what we're doing here with it. I'm really proud of it. So yeah. Yeah. If you like, I'll send me a couple files. I'll send you some,
I
and love to
I
hear what you think.
I will definitely take you up on that offer.
Yeah, happy to do that.
All right, well, cool. So I have one more topic I wanted to ask you about. I was doing a little bit of digging on your website, and I noticed that you occasionally will do these kind of Lightroom live events. What are those? Who are they for? And why did you create them?
Yeah, you should do one. Assuming you use Lightroom. Do you use
Oh, of
Lightroom?
course. Yeah, yeah, no,
Of course, yeah.
yeah, I use Lightroom for everything. Yep. Well,
Occasionally, I'll
not
come across a
everything, but
photographer that doesn't, but yeah, cool.
yeah,
Yeah, no,
those weird Capture One people or the DxO Pure Raw people. Like, yeah,
exactly.
there's.
Well, one of the guests I had on early on was a guy. Have you heard of Iridium Digital, by the by?
Uh-uh.
A lot of Fuji camera people have heard of Iridium Digital. And why that is because
Oh, yeah,
the
because the X-Trans
algorithms,
files.
exactly. Yeah. And
Yeah.
so, and Adobe doesn't, create special algorithms. They don't want to take the time to do that. So anyway, the guy, his name's Brian Griffiths, who has his own company, Iridium Digital, which is a raw converter. And they can plug it into Lightroom so it can work with Lightroom. But he created his own raw converter many moons ago that's coveted for its sharpening and ability to handle detail. But anyway, Brian, even though it's Lightroom Live, was one of the early interviewees. that I had in that little podcast. Honestly, it's I would call it a training ground for me. What you're doing here, interviewing people like me and such, I'm just starting to get into it a little bit myself, and I thought the topic of Lightroom would be a good catalyst to do so. But I'm kind of it's evolving a little bit, and instead of me flapping my gums about how to work with Lightroom, as I bring other people in and I introduce other photographers now, and I talk about their workflow and
Okay.
just different things. And I call it a training ground because I think what I'm going to do as soon as I'm going to move that over to Wild Eye. I want Wild Eye itself to have its own ability to have interviews, kind of like what you're doing here. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I saw my friend Jennifer Renwick was one of your guests, and
Yeah.
so yeah, that's really cool. I kind of like the idea of exposing people to different ways of walking through a workflow because I teach for Muse workshops, and one of my favorite aspects of that is I get to teach with other pros all the time, and I love to watch how they use stuff differently. And it's always fascinating to see, like, wow, you use that tool like that? That's cool. I never would have even thought to try that. So it's pretty cool to like get those little snippets of kind of tricks and tips that people have figured out and tested. And so I love those kind of workflow conversations.
I do too. Yeah. And since you mentioned it, all of those that I've done, I think there's only a dozen so far. I haven't done that many of them, probably even less. I'm about to do a bunch more, but they're all available for free you can just go to my website and bradleyphotographic.com, and under blog, those are all listed off there. And since we're talking about printing, one of the ones I'll point people to is one of the early ones I did with a guy named Eric Josephs, who, do you know who that is? Eric
I don't.
Josephs?
Mm-mm.
He runs Freestyle Photographic, which is a big store in Los Angeles that specializes mainly in analog printing. But anyway, Eric, even though what I just said, is one of the smartest people I know in the realm of digital printing and digital workflow. So he came on and we had a 2-hour conversation on digital printing and color management. So since we're talking about printing, if you're interested, go check out that specific one where Eric and I are exhaustively talking about printing workflow. But I think it's a very informative one as well. And Eric is really smart.
I love that. Do you know Matt Payne from Flagstaff?
I don't.
He runs a print lab down there where they're doing like all platinum, palladium prints and stuff like that.
Oh, really? Cool.
Yeah, so that
Oh,
might be a fun one to talk to him on there
I
about that.
absolutely would talk to him about. That's the kind of thing that I would love to do here at some point. I mentioned I have a 2,300 square foot place here, but what I didn't mention is downstairs I have a semi-usable 1,200 square foot space, and the landlords and I are drying it out right now, and it looks like we're going to be able to dry it out because it's really damp down there. And I'm going to assess it through the rainy season, and if we're able to keep it dry successfully, I'm going to build a dark room down there so we can do platinum palladium workshops and alternative process workshops. That's definitely something that I would love to do here.
Yeah, if you
Yeah.
like alternative process, you know Michael Strickland.
I know the name, but I don't know him. Yeah.
Yeah, he built like this giant photo lab in Kansas, and it's all like carbon transfer, like really wild stuff he's doing. So that's another one to check out.
Oh, cool. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Awesome, man. Well, I have one more question for you. Who do you recommend our listeners learn more about here on the podcast? I think you've already thrown out a couple of names, but bring them up again one more time.
Yeah, I'll mention two since third one you already had on there, but Joe Placco, I think his website's Joe Placco Photography. He's the guy that runs our print lab here, and he's a very passionate outdoor guy. He does landscape work, underwater work, shoots digital, shoots film. He's definitely one of the guys that's been inspiring me to build the darkroom here to begin with. But overall, wonderful human being and a passionate artist, and a very good one. And he's going to do a show here in the gallery in late spring. And then a dear friend of mine, John McCormick, who is a excellent photographer. I known him for years. He did a workshop with me and a guy named Franz Lonting, who's a National Geographic photographer. And he was one of the attendees, and I just fell in love with him right away and his work. And we've been friends ever since. But he's a really great person to talk to, and he also happens to run camera over at Apple.
It's kind of a big deal.
A little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, awesome, Jason. Thank you for taking the time. And this has been a lot of fun. And I love learning about what you're up to. And hopefully through the podcast, you'll get a few more people interested in what you're doing with Wild Eye.
I hope so. Thanks for having me on. And I'll say at the tail end of this, please, everybody, go to wildeyemagazine.com. You can download the first issue for free to check us out. And we'll give you the coupon code to get a special deal not available to the public to subscribe. We can use your support to build this community because we're working hard behind the scenes to bring you beautiful portfolios, well curated, well thought out, with lots of good writing in them. By the time this comes out, issue 2 will be out, and Art Wolf is our guy for issue 2, along with actually John McCormick will be in that issue, Melissa Gru's article, Austin Mann's article, and then in issue 3, looks like we're going to have Amy Vitale lined up for issue 3 as well, along with, since you mentioned his name before, Bill Neal.
Perfect. I love it. Well, thanks, Jason. Yeah.
Matt, my pleasure. Thanks a lot, my friend. Let's be in touch and send me some files.
I will. Well, thanks for joining me for another great episode. A huge thank you to Jason Bradley for sharing his insights into the world of photography publishing and fine art printing. It's exciting to see Wild Eye Magazine step up to fill the gap left by outdoor photographer, and I can't wait to see where it goes. Before we wrap up, I want to take a moment and talk about the 2 incredible prints that Jason sent me. One was a glossy metal print and the other was a matte metal print. And I have to say, the matte metal completely blew me away. Have a look for yourself. These aren't your typical metal prints. They have depth, texture, and richness that you just don't see in the standard metal printing process. It's truly a unique offering, and if you're a photographer looking to elevate how your work is presented in print, you'll definitely want to check out Jason's lab. Just to show you, here's the glossy version for comparison. Pretty awesome stuff. I highly recommend giving his lab a shot. Also, if you're enjoying the podcast and you want to help keep it going, I would love your support on Patreon. Please head over to patreon.com/fstopandlisten to join our amazing community and get access to exclusive content. Every contribution helps make these conversations possible, and I truly appreciate it. Lastly, I just got hit with a $14,000 plumbing bill, and boy, could I really use your help. Thanks for stopping in, collaborating with us, and listening. See you next week.